Okay, it's that time again. The classes are closing in on their final forms in beta, so it's time to declare who's winning and who's losing. This time it's been a little challenging. There are very clear winners and obvious losers within the melee category, but almost nobody gets away without an asterisk or two. And there is one big asterisk over everybody, and that is that melee in general are kind of losing because of the removal of game-wide melee range increases. So if you had a talent that increased your melee range, that is now gone. Blizzard basically thinks it's no longer needed. I think time and playing the content will certainly be the judge on that one, but it does mean that some of your game sense will just be a little bit off because those numbers have been changed. Remember too that in this video I'm talking about the overall experience for the average player. High-end viability and strength are a thing, and they are important to some players. Thing is though, those will chop and change with balance. Today I'm focused on basically if playing it in general feels better or worse, because when you're picking a class, you don't want to just pick the flavor of the month. What you want to do is find something that has got good foundations that you can carry through a whole expansion so that by the time you hit that final patch, you have achieved a level of mastery with that spec where you just feel like a living god. And this was a big video, and that means a big thanks to today's sponsor, boot.dev/Bellular. Here's the deal. They exist to teach you back-end development using Python and Go, and they solve the problem of tutorial hell, one that I experienced when I was learning to code, and it's where you're just aimlessly bounding about the place from random tutorial to random tutorial, not following a structured learning path, and that is exactly what Boot does. And if you go to boot.dev/Bellular, you'll get 25% off your first purchase. They have a wealth of in-depth content from the basics like learning Python all the way through to the more advanced topics that are directly career applicable. And woven through all of that to make it fun, you got levels, XP, achievements, quests, even raid bosses, and that's all along with an active developer community. And now is actually a terrific time to start because they just posted a 7-hour walkthrough of their Python course. So certainly by the time you're through that, you'll feel accomplished. You'll actually learn Python, which is one of the foundational languages that is amazing to learn. Beyond that, of course, they've got so much more, and they keep it fun. Even projects like, say, building a Pokedex, learning object-oriented programming through RPG combat examples, the sort of thing that leverages what you already know to help you understand things and learn. Now, from my own experience, I know that self-directed learning is the best. What Boot does is give you an amazing framework all in one place to allow you to go properly in depth. You'll write a ton of code, you'll learn real skills, and that's boot.dev/Bellular. Over there, you'll get 25% off your first purchase, and that's backed by their no question asked 30-day money-back guarantee, and they've got free demos for all of their courses, so you can browse that and check them out. Ret Paladin is a real fun one. So on paper, it's an absolutely huge winner. In reality, its wins are tempered by some minor losses. Here's an example, right? Radiant Glory makes Wake of Ashes trigger wings, rather than wings being its own button. And that is unbelievably fun, like you just kind of blow up and glow and do a lot of damage. But if you pick it, the very short duration of the version of wings that you get means that it stops lining up with its damage windows. That can be a bit of a downside. Another loss is one of your raid spots, which is a dramatic way of putting it. Now, the deal here is, your defensive utility is still absolutely incredible, but you have lost Retribution Aura as one of your things. So in a way, that's kind of like a free raid spot just gone. Dev Aura is obviously still strong, but basically, it's just Dev Aura rather than both of them, and that means there's one raid spot guaranteed instead of two. So that might sting, but there are some free wins. As an example, Ret used to struggle, right, with being railroaded into single target or AoE, and that's actually now fixed up with a more viable hybrid build. Another example is Templar Strikes. It's down to one charge, so your rotation won't feel as absolutely RSI-inducing and crowded when you're using it. Then the hero talents are actually great here. Templar basically results in humongous hammer time. It's very satisfying. And Herald of the Sun is basically holy laser beams. Those feel great. Now, some high-end Ret players are currently dooming on its expected performance right now. Thing is, that can change with balance, especially since Season 1 is starting 2 weeks after the expansion launches, and you've also got Mythic Week being a week after that, which probably means Blizzard will be doing a lot of tuning work over the next while. So the final verdict then is that playing Ret is constantly a joy. The damage profile feels perfect for solo content, great in dungeons, your personal utility is almost unmatched, and that feels amazing. You just feel empowered and capable. You've got a comfy rotation that's not too sweaty, and it lends itself to an expansion with more challenging and, one could say, melee unfriendly mechanics in raids, dungeons, and delves. Big picture, I would say that no spec is as easy to recommend as broadly as Retribution is. Survival Hunters, per Survival Hunters, because it feels like you guys have at times been real awesome, but big picture has kind of struggled a bit since the melee rework, just with a bit of a sense of direction and players vibing with it. So what I'll say is this: do not sleep on survival in the War Within. Straight up. The reworked gameplay flow feels great, and, well, to explain. Tip of the Spear is redesigned, right? It's now a fun new rhythmic passive to play with, where you press kill command to get bonus damage on your next attack. So basically what you do is you build up stacks, and then you spend it on your strongest hits. It's a flow of gameplay that honestly feels fantastic. Then you've also got the option for a 45-second cooldown coordinated assault, and that just leads to constant fun and damage, really. Then there's a new focus on explosive shot procs, and that adds a little bit to the mixed range hunter fantasy, so that's quite great. And then, in just all the smaller details, from fantasy to resource management, Blizzard have done a good job of taking what was already good and then making it better. Now, in some ways, you're still a black sheep, but honestly, the core gameplay here is real strong. And there's some nice buffs as well. As an example, 2 charges of Survival of the Fittest, which is quite nice. There are utility buffs, right? You've got the new Implosive Trap, which is a knock-up. You've got easy access to Bursting Shot, and a 3-target Intimidate. Now, balance-wise, there's crazy AoE potential with Sentinel. Certainly, if you're a Night Elf Hunter, you're going to be very happy. All the fantasy sort of line up. The downside, though, is Pack Leader is still really, really boring. But honestly, as a complete picture, you're just left with Survival being very fun for soloing in dungeons, but maybe a bit lower priority as melee for raids. Now, saying that, there is one major loss, but it will depend on what you enjoyed. So if you liked all the different colored wildfire bomb effects, well, basically rip, because that entire thing is gone, but it's gone basically to make room for other improvements. And those improvements are real, and it means that Survival in Isolation feels great. It is absolutely a winner in my book, even though to some, it may feel a little niche. Death Knights then. As a class, you guys are coming in swinging where there's been great change. So Blizzard removed a whole bunch of boring throughput talents from the class tree, and they then used the space to design a better version of said tree. Now, it's not that Blizzard added loads of new utility, it's far more that you're better able to talent into utility the tree already had. So instead of just fighting to get all of your damage capstones, you can now do things like, say, grab a Soul Reaver, an A-Bomb Limb, or a new 3-person anti-magic shell. So that'll be very appreciated. With that said, though, let's get into the specs themselves. First up is Frost, where you've got some cool new capstones. So you get these ones one after another, and they are Icy Death Torrent and the Long Winter. They basically both buff your auto attacks immensely, and that synergizes real well with Icy Talons, and using those together feels super satisfying. Then there's also a new and improved Frost Scythe. This version hits harder, and it's on a shorter cooldown that is also reduced by consuming procs of Killing Machine. But perhaps most of all here in change is resources. That's because drowning in runic power often isn't fun, actually. You feel more like you're just trying to prevent a bar from being full, rather than actively playing your spec the way that you want. I hope that makes sense. Now, what they've done to runic power also helps prevent something that has historically dominated the spec, and that is Breath of Sindragosa. So, with resources rebalanced, Breath can now hit a bit harder, it can be a bit more expensive, and basically that means it's more of a burst damage cooldown rather than the sort of thing that you're just trying to extend basically infinitely. So for a lot of players, that's going to be a humongous and positive change. And bigger picture, it's hard to describe just how much more smooth all of this is to play with these changes, though I do have a bit of a warning, right? With early gear, it can feel a touch slow. So if you hate downtime, absolutely, you might be kind of frustrated, and if you are a big fan of two-handed Frost, basically the new auto attack builds are not at all well considered for the slower swing speed of two-handers, so you may feel just a little forced into dual wielding. Then there's the long-standing gripe of having to rely on your death and decay uptime for AoE obliterates. So that is still there, but what they have done is add a grace period to things. So if you need to step out of your death and decay for, say, a mechanic, well, you're basically not going to be punished for that. So that definitely is a plus. Now, there's currently some mastery bugs that may make it to live. I suppose one would hope not. But putting those aside, really the biggest win is that Riders of the Apocalypse is probably the coolest set of hero talents in the game. Using it with this feels great. Another big winner, in fact, an even bigger winner, is on Holy Death Knight. That's because some new abilities and damage profiles all just point towards Blizzard actually getting it, and that's real positive. So resource generation changes mean that runic power now comes in a lot smoother. Sudden Doom buffs Death Coil instead of making it free, which may sound like a terrible downgrade, but in context, I think it actually feels better. Then there's Doomed Bidding. This one's real cool. It's a choice node with Gargoyle, and what it does is it makes your procced Death Coils also summon in an undead mage. So you get these like hard-hitting, nice big chunky death coils, and a mage pops out. It feels real good, and of course, if you're not a fan of Gargoyle, this is really good for another option. Next, and keeping with the theme of major cooldowns getting a replacement option in the talent tree, there's Raise Abomination. So this replaces Army of the Dead, and instead of like a big army of ghouls, you get an abomination that basically spreads plague and wounds. Pretty cool, and it's on a 90-second cooldown. And that 90-second cooldown feels especially good because of the end cap of Riders of the Apocalypse. Now, it normally causes all 4 horsemen to spawn whenever you use Army, though, because Raise a Bomb replaces Army, and it's on a 90-second cooldown, it basically means you're always summoning in your horsemen, and that's just kind of cool. Another thing that's real cool is Festering Scythe. With this talent selected, popping 20 wounds turns Festering Strike into an AoE scythe that puts wounds on the mobs that it hits. And I just kind of love this design because it's, it's a cool ability, it feels powerful in AoE, but what's real nice is that it replaces that button, so Blizzard have managed to do this without causing button bloat. I think that's a really elegant way of implementing this. And speaking of button bloat, Unholy Blight is now a passive triggered by Dark Transformation, so again, it's really nice that they're just trimming down some of that bloat. And this one, big picture, feels really damn good. Now that being said, if you're using Riders of the Apocalypse, sometimes you can get a few little bugs with them. Again, we'll just have to hope that those are fixed up. Certainly though, both DPS Death Knights are feeling pretty damn good in the War Within. Enhancement Shaman, and this one's kind of lucky, they were actually on the loser pile until a last wave of changes came in. So here's the deal. Blizzard have upgraded the class tree, and basically you can pick more of your utility, that's real good, and also you've got a new personal defensive in the form of Stone Bulwark Totem, so it's quite nice. Now where things that previously went wrong was the spec tree changes, and the reason why is they moved Flurry over from the class tree. Thing is though, that then made pathing a little bit harder, and they had 9 2-pointer talents, which meant that loads of talent points just being eaten up. Now things are different. There are 6 2-point talents that frees up 3 talent points, so that's way better for your buildcraft, and there's a few other nice little changes. As an example, Doom Winds is now down to 60 seconds from 90, and Primordial Wave is down to 30 seconds from 45, and now Crash Lightning has got a 4-yard buff to its range. Of course, that massively increases its area, so yeah, that'll feel real good. So what this is very much the same enhancement that it was, but it's a little bit smoother. Now, with the hero talents, they are a little bit mixed, I would say. Totemic adds a very high priority button. The problem is, though, your rotation's already kind of busy, right? And it just has a mismatch of synergies, and it makes it feel a bit awkward to play, at least in our opinion. The good news, though, is that Stormbringer is really awesome. I mean, just look and feel, those are fantastic, and it naturally works well with the physical lightning-heavy shaman builds. Now, if you really like going the Elementalist build, and you prefer the more fiery stuff, you may not like Stormbringer as much, but certainly I do think it comes together real well. Windwalker then, it's a solid winner. So the majority of changes are to energy and chi generation, and those work real well with the revamped tree. It's just nice things like needing to stand on Jadefire Stomp being gone, and Whirling Dragon Punch has got really cool synergies with the new multi-blackout kick teachings of the monastery. So that's great. Bone Dust Brew is gone, and at long last, they've made a big cut into Button Bloat, and they've mostly done this by turning both Expel Harm and Chi Wave into passives. Then best of all, the White Tiger statue is now automatic. So altogether these changes make an already great spec an excellent one. Like, you've still got tons of CC, Mystic Touch, and just their core gameplay, which feels great. This is an example of refinements, trimming some fat and making it clean, but still giving you plenty of choice. It's a big winner, and for today's video, it's the last of the winners. Rogues. Oh, where do I even start with the rogues? Rogues either need to do ridiculous damage or get a lot of love in a patch. The doom feel for each spec is honestly, it's pretty real. For changes, right, their class tree lost Shadow Dance, so it's now sub only, and that's mostly it. And it's kind of the same with the specs. Little has changed, and the problem here is that the hero talents feel severely undercooked. So if you like these specs a hell of a lot as they are, you're going to be happy enough and you'll get a few bells and whistles with your hero talents. But you've got the nightmare of watching everyone else get some shiny new utility, nice fixes and cool things, while you just kind of get stuff that's half-baked and a little bit poorly considered. Like, that kind of bugs you. The specs just feel a bit bloated and lacking the love that others have got. As an example, let's do Assassination first. Playing the Deathstalker tree has been compared to hammering a nail into a sensitive opening. And that's because it asks you to reach maximum points for every 4th Envenom, which is extremely unintuitive with how the spec actually generates and uses them. So that's a problem. Then there's Fatebound, which is a cool idea, but is almost entirely passive RNG. Now, I still think that Assassination at its core is a fun spec with solid design headroom. It's just a victim of withering in the vine without real attention. Existing issues in the tree remain while other classes are getting additions and fixes. And really, it's why we call a video like this winners and losers. It's not necessarily scuffed, but maybe don't take Deathstalker. So this is not an anti-recommendation. This is not me saying to re-roll, but it is saying there are some winners, and if those are winners, then this absolutely is a loser. And another loser is Outlaw, so much so that the class Discord are just talking about FF14 and Lost Ark now. Seriously. Okay, an example. Let's take the hero tree of Trickster. It's not a bad tree, but the capstone is a big new ability, Coup de Grace, which procs over your usual finisher, and that might all be seeming cool. The problem is, it has an animation lock. An animation lock that breaks your flow, stops you from using off-GCD things, and has got just a whole bunch of bugged interactions that actually break other talents, which can reduce your damage. I would very much hope that those things get fixed up, but, you know, the idea of being animation locked into something is historically not the favorite thing of MMO players. Now, beyond that, yes, it's still more or less the same Outlaw that you know. It's just worse off with no issues fixed and nothing super new or fun. There is still time, but again, it feels rough, and sadly, it is the same story for our third rogue spec, Subtlety. It's fine. It is fine, but there's just been no major improvements made to the core. Some tuning changes have shifted up the talents and some priorities a little bit, but any big positives that could come from hero talents are just overweighed by frustrations around things like Sepsis's place as a talent, the likes of Gormaw's Bite feeling underwhelming, and the energy economy feeling a little bit pointless. And then also that there's not been a lot of communication from Blizzard on this one. As to whether there'll be further changes, it's kind of radio silence, and that leads to fear. So what I'll say is, unless you already love Rogue, you should stay away. And that leads me to another loser, Havoc Demon Hunter and its changes. There are changes. There are literally changes, yes. It's maybe just not the wealth of changes that some players would love. Now, fundamentally, it is still a movement-heavy spec in a game that is full of mechanics that like to torture melee. So don't worry, you'll still be able to enjoy regularly decommissioning yourself. As for the hero talents, they're a little mixed, like with the Rogue. Aldrachi Reaver is a weird one because it's kind of awesome, actually. It basically adds a whole bunch of juice to throw glaive, and it makes it a more important part of your spec. With it, right, throwing a procced upgraded glaive then gives you an effect if you Blade Danced or Chaos Strike first. That might sound a bit complicated, but basically just think of it as a 2-hit combo, and it depends on whatever ability you use first. So that's really cool. It's a design space that I think does mesh with the Havoc Demon Hunter, though what it does do is risk gobbling up gameplay, leaving little room for other parts of Havoc. So it's really cool. It's just a question of, do you feel it fits when you actually go to play it? The other side of things then is Felsguard, which basically adds, more passive demon time and damage, but it does not really feel that, it just doesn't feel that impactful. Now, there are new icons for your upgraded spells. Those are a nice touch, but yes, this is Rogue 2. Hero talents come in, maybe mess things up a bit, give you some cool things, but have some downsides. The problem, though, is existing problems haven't really been as looked at. It just hasn't had the love and care that other things have felt, and that means that, like with the Rogues, it just feels a little bit asleep at the wheel. Now, that does give me, in a way, some hope, and you may say, Michael, that's the most ridiculous copium, but I would say, right? Take Retribution Paladin and Dragonflight. It launched with a whole load of problems, but patch 10.0.7 put in a pretty massive rework of the spec and humongously improved it, essentially providing the foundation for what we're seeing today. That could, and I hope it does, happen with all these specs. The next one then is Feral Druid. This one has not been abandoned, but I think for most people, they're gonna class this as a loser, even though the changes are kind of good. Now, that might make me sound absolutely insane, so let me explain. The new vision for how this plays is like being hit with a stop sign. Energy regen has been nerfed into the ground. Tiger's Fury, it doesn't reset, nor does it extend. It's basically just closer to being a short cooldown. Blizzard's removal then of the range increasing effects also hurts here, especially in AoE. The whole Mash Primal Wrath AoE has been removed, and that means that it's all about just maintaining a strong rip and then biting. And essentially what we have here is a vision, a design that is slow, that is considered, right? That's pretty obvious here, and I do respect it. There is depth in this design, and I know that not everybody wants a super fast, swimming in energy, high APM sort of setup. The thing though is, getting used to this from what you would have been used to if you had been playing Feral in, say, Dragonflight, will kind of sting. Basically, putting lots of effort into snapshotting perfectly and playing amazingly, and then just going back to having energy-starved downtime, that feels bad, and of course it feels especially bad in dungeons and open-world content, and I would say that does extend to delves, which for some people will be a little rough. The last two losers are in similar categories, and they are the Arms and Fury Warriors, and the reason why they're losers is because they've had some minor, iterations, but again, not really big solves to things, and some stuff doesn't really feel quite finished. It just feels like there's little that's new or special. That being said, the Mountain Thane that Fury Warrior can go for, well, it really is pretty damn fun. But let's get into things. So, Fury players are right now a little bit spooked that Bloodthirst can't be got right. It's either shaping up to be way too strong or a bit useless, depending on the final numbers, so that's some player fears. And it's weird because that's like a maths issue, and both specs are having maths issues right now. Over for Arms, Overpower is rightfully unpopular, and it kind of overwhelms the rotation, but then you've got Execute, which currently is looking to either be laughably weak or just all their damage. Or they'll end up just spending a patch gambling on Mortal Strike resets and praying to have enough rage. It's just weird. It's basically balance, tuning, resources, that kind of thing. Big picture, lots of fine parts of a spec that are struggling to come together to a really fantastic whole. Then for the hero talents, they are a little bit mixed, but generally positive. It's just not enough to overcome the core spec worries. That being said, I'll say that Fury does feel way closer to being done than Arms is, and thankfully, it's got Mountain Thane, and Mountain Thane is cool. So it's a hero talent that gives Thunderclap all of Whirlwind's bonuses, and that just replaces it in your rotation. That looks and feels real cool. So that's good. It's almost good enough to call Fury a winner. It just seems like a little bit more time in the kitchen is needed. So then, that's all the melee specs. Now, to be real, none of these are awful, right? If this was a tier list, I'd be struggling to put things below a B or a C+. I know that some of the rogue stuff does feel particularly bad, but do remember, this is winners and losers. That's relative to each other. Overall, we're in a better state than we generally have been. I think the strengths from the Dragonflight rework are basically still there. Hero talents can be a bit mixed, though. You do see in the best cases, they really just reinforce already excellent bits of design in class fantasy. You're definitely seeing that with Death Knight, Windwalker, and Paladin. But in the worst cases, it's just kind of bloat that gets in the way. As an example, Totemic. Well, Totems makes a lot of sense for an enhancement shaman, but I just don't think it ends up really working with the gameplay. Now, one thing is different from the past. These are not the days of Shadowlands. Back in the day, if a spec was borked, I mean, you'd just be waiting till the next expansion. Of course, if you look at Dragonflight, think about what happened with Rat Paladin. It had loads of issues, and then in patch 10.0.7, they did a revamp, getting it into a vastly better state. So while there's absolutely work to do, I am expecting that some of that work will be done before the next expansion. I think that'll be their first opportunity to make more deep changes to things. Anything earlier than that's probably just fixing up launch quirks. Anyway, that's that. Personally, I mean, come on, man, it's kind of got to be Rat. So that's my thoughts. What are you considering? Do let me know. With that said, stay tuned because we will be doing ranged very, very shortly. Okay, that's it for me. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.